Korean car company Hyundai, once perceived as a reliable, inexpensive, rather boring alternative to high-priced and flashier European alternatives, it has gotten a whole new lease on life, creating adventurous designs for the EV world, making it a formidable competitor even to Tesla, causing the Wall Street Journal this week to ask, how did Hyundai get so cool?
It's an Ev, rhymes with Kev.
And it's not just Hyundai that's looking to freshen up its brand. Consider Facebook, with Mark Zuckerberg going so far as to rename his entire company in a bid to make up some lost ground to TikTok, though the arc of his space shot to the metaverse may get bent a bit by the gravitational pull of generative AI.
AI is already crucial to the foundations of the metaverse and will be even more so in the future.
All this rebranding has now apparently made it all the way to the Oval Office, as the New York Times caught Speaker of the House McCarthy, as well as House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, holding an important debt ceiling meeting with the president wearing those flashy dress sneakers. But before we get too terribly excited, it would be well to remember some famous instances where attempts to rebrand fell well short of the mark. Starting with the auto industry itself. Does anyone remember the campaign in the late 80s to make us think that the Oldsmobile was really for young people?
In short, the new Cutlass Supreme is not your father's Oldsmobile.
And has anyone seen any Oldsmobiles around lately? Or how about that so-called New Coke that was going to revive a time-honored brand?
New Coke is catching on. The taste is better and newer than. You said the P word.
Rebranding has been known to extend even to the world of geopolitics, as Secretary of State Hillary Clinton did with her famous campaign to turn things around with Russia.
We want to reset our relationship.
Looking back on it now, in the light of Ukraine, it's not clear exactly what the world got out of that particular rebranding. Even the central banks are getting into the game, with the debate raging this week about whether the Fed would execute a pause or a skip at its June meeting.
I'm not a massive fan of these linguistic acrobatics that central banks end up getting themselves into.
But maybe the place where we need rebranding the most is in how Washington deals with things like budgets and deficits. Oh yes, the full faith and credit of the United States of America. But that may take more than just a new logo or new shoes with white soles. For that, we may need a fundamental rethinking. That does it for this episode of Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston. This is Bloomberg. See you next week.
Somebody is watching and says, I want to be Ari Emanuel when I grow up. What should somebody do to get into the talent agency business or the business you're in?
Well, it's hopefully what I've taught my kids. You got to be intellectually curious. You got to be, you got to show up. And you know this like I know this. I got on a lot of planes. You just, even though that voice in your head is saying, oh God, I'm so tired, I don't want to do this. You got to show up. You got to be charmingly relentless. You have to build emotional endurance. because there's no straight line to success. It's kind of all over the place, and you have to just be able to work through those things. And then I think one of the things that I do every week is I try to create serendipity.
A multi-trillion-dollar industry. There's a lot of ground to cover.
Commodities got absolutely crushed.
We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Bloomberg ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Hello and welcome to Emma Barnett Meets. And this week I'm meeting the space expert and physicist Professor Brian Cox. And I'm really looking forward to asking him about how he gets his head around the vastness of space and to explain it to all of us, or try to anyway. How he also goes about his daily life when he knows how insignificant we really are, and what he makes of NASA's new telescope and those amazing images. Welcome to the programme. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me and to all of our viewers. And I actually wanted to start with the new NASA telescope. We'll come to your particular project in a moment, but it's named after the man who ran the agency in the 60s and oversaw the first manned mission to the moon, James Webb. What do you make of what we're seeing so far? Because it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's a remarkable instrument. I mean, you think of the predecessor, which is the Hubble Space Telescope. I think it's almost impossible to imagine a world without that. Even if you don't know the images that we're familiar with of the universe, many of them, the spectacular galaxies and star-forming regions, they're from Hubble. But the Webb is a significant step forward. And technically, one of the most important things is it can see what we call longer wavelength light, or infrared light. And that's important because if you think about, we want to see the first galaxies forming. So we want to understand how the first stars and galaxies formed in the universe. And so what you do is you look far out into the universe. And because light travels quite slowly across cosmic distances, let's say you have a galaxy that's, the most distant one you can see with the naked eye is about 2 million light years away. So that means that the light has been traveling for 2 million years to reach us. And it's a remarkable thing, actually, to think when you look, it's called the Andromeda Galaxy. And if you know where you're looking, you can just catch it out of the corner of your eye. If you think about it, you're seeing that as it was 2 million years ago.
Yes, although
because it takes the light 2 million years to travel.
I don't like being late to information, so that makes me feel very out of date.
Well, it's remarkable. I mean, it began its journey before we had evolved on Earth. So in the time it took, and that's the nearest neighbouring galaxy. The Webb looks so far out that it's capturing light that's been travelling for over 13 billion years. But the universe has been expanding, and so the light has been stretching. And so for the most distant galaxies, we're looking back in time almost to the Big Bang. Then the Hubble was not sensitive to that light. So that the Webb can see the formation of the first galaxies. It's essentially looking all the way back to very close to the beginning of time. And that's very important because we're not entirely sure exactly how those first galaxies formed.
The idea of what you just talked about in terms of how much time this has taken and what it's covering, do you think we will ever be able to see the Big Bang?
Well, we almost can. It's not the Webb telescope. There's something called the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is light that was emitted in the universe. And it's a very precise number. It's 380,000 years after the Big Bang, which is not very long at all. Right? The universe is 13.8 billion years old. So we can see that. It's microwaves because it's been stretched so much by the expansion of the universe. Going back, the problem with light is that in those earliest times, the universe was so hot and so dense that light couldn't travel through it. So it was opaque. So you can't use light to go back earlier than that. But what we can potentially do, not yet, we're not good enough yet, but the technology we use now to detect colliding black holes, which is another remarkable thing, but I'll leave that one aside for now. But we have the technology to do that. And that technology possibly could allow us to probe right back to this thing, the Big Bang. And again, whether or not that's the origin of time, we can talk about as well.
Brian, you've dedicated your life to explaining the scale of the universe to people. You have a new world tour and show called Horizons. What's the goal? Are you trying to teach people new things and understand the world they're living in better, or what are you aiming for?
Well, actually, all those things. So it works, I hope, on different levels. So I talk about cosmology. We've spoken about, what we call the large-scale structure of the universe. So the galaxies and how they formed, how the universe has evolved since the Big Bang. But also, I've got very interested in my academic work in black holes. And black holes, and they're really evocative things. I think everyone's heard of these strange things, these totally collapsed stars, from which nothing apparently can escape. But in the past few years, past few decades really, beginning work that Stephen Hawking really began back in the 1970s and many others, we've begun to suspect there's a lot more to them. And they've started forcing us to reassess our understanding of what space and time are. And that's a really weird sentence. You might think, well, space is the arena in which we live and time just ticks, but it really isn't. It looks like, from studying these things, there are building blocks of space and building blocks of time. And what I say in the show is that's a mind-blowing idea, and I talk about that. But the key point is there's a great quote from Einstein, a beautiful story that Einstein told about when he was a little boy. He was 6 or 7 years old, and his dad gave him a compass. And so he looked at the compass and he saw, well, there's this thing, this needle, and it always points north, points in this direction. So there's something invisible that I can't see that underlies our reality that's making this needle point north. And he said later in life, it was my first encounter with an idea, which is if you look at nature carefully and really pay attention, and you're lucky, you can catch a glimpse of something deeply hidden, which is a beautiful phrase, something deeply hidden, which is the deep structure of reality. It's what our reality is. And so black holes, they're kind of a metaphor in a way. I talk about them as Rosetta Stones in the sky. They're the things that by studying them, and you say, why? Why would we study these things? Well, in studying these things, we're beginning to get a deep picture of what our reality actually is. And that's a remarkable idea, but it's a beautiful idea that runs through all of science.
How do you define a black hole?
Well, it's in Einstein's theory, which again is a remarkable thing. It's published in 1915, over 100 years old. But it's just a region of space from which even light can't escape.
Our studios in New York and San Francisco, our expert hosts of the data and analysis about the companies you know and the startups to watch, plus the interviews you don't want to miss. Watch Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow on Bloomberg Technology, the only daily business show dedicated to tech, right in the middle of the trading action. 12 p.m. on the East Coast, 9 a.m. in the West, only on Bloomberg Television, your global business authority. Bloomberg UK, your source for news and analysis covering the biggest challenges facing the UK government, economy, financial services and markets.
Tax cuts should not be the priority. It's about a credible plan for growth over the next 2-3 years.
In this post-Brexit world, how do you see actually servicing your clients?
It was disruptive, and it's going to have implications to how capital raising works.
Now we're having the perfect storm in the UK.
Watch Francine Lacqua Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
We're investing in a lot of different capabilities and features that makes the in-store shopping experience that much easier, that much more compelling, whether it's price check, browsing inventory in this store, so that we can really make that experience as convenient and as simple as possible.
Convenient, simple, that's sort of what people have needed in the age of COVID. Is that here to stay, or do we go back when finally we all hope that the pandemic will be behind us in some way? Do our changing shopping habits go back again?
What's really interesting about retail in my 20-plus experience is that convenience never reverts itself. Now, the form of convenience has shifted, whereas, say, in 2000 to 2010, a lot of convenience was driven by more stores nearby. Now it's stores in addition to digital. There's nothing closer than the phone in your hand.
And by understanding what they are and knowing more about them, what do we then learn?
Well, so Stephen Hawking back in the 70s published a paper The initial one was called Black Hole Explosions, which is a great title for a paper. Yeah. And he calculated, he found out that black holes, in his language, he said black holes ain't so black. Right? They glow in the sky, like coals in the sky, and they radiate. And so over time, they lose energy and mass and ultimately disappear over huge timescales. And that's so important. And I show this picture in the show, that if you go into Westminster Abbey and look on the floor of Westminster Abbey, on Stephen's memorial stone, then you find his equation for the temperature of a black hole literally chiseled in stone on the floor of an abbey. So you might say, why? Why is it so important? This was the key. This was this Rosetta Stone idea in trying to understand what happens. What happens to the stuff that fell in? It was when you thought these things existed forever, which is pre-Hawking, right? Then you think, well, it's okay, it gets locked up inside, it can never get out, we don't care. But the thing evaporates away, one day it will be gone. So then suddenly you have to be faced with this question, what happened to everything then? If I throw a book into a black hole, is it somehow possible in the far future, if you collect all this so-called Hawking radiation that comes off, is it possible to reconstruct the information in the book? And that's been a question, simple question, that's driven this tremendous amount of research for 50 years. And it was pretty much solved in 2019, actually, and 2020. Pretty much. I mean, there's still a huge number of questions. But roughly, the statement is everything comes out again. All the information comes out. So everything that fell in principle, in the far future, you could reconstruct the information of everything that fell in. It's an astonishing idea. Because the last thing I'll say is that before that, before the Hawking papers and before this modern understanding, inside a black hole, just according to Einstein, sits the end of time, which is an astonishing thing to say, because we can see them. We have a photograph of one of these things in the center of a galaxy, two actually now. And when you look at that photograph, you're looking at the end of time in space. So then you think, well, if things go to the end of time, how does everything get out again? Yeah. And that's the content of this tremendous work in theoretical physics. This work, studying black holes, which is it's one of those things that a certain kind of person says is useless, right? You say, why? Who cares, right? It turns out that the techniques that are being developed and the understanding that's being gained from looking at these things has got a very strong crossover with building quantum computers. Right, which is the quantum computers are in laboratories now. They have a tremendous potential to revolutionize our civilization. Incredibly powerful computing devices.
Well, yes, and also that's sometimes the defense given, isn't it, about, what's going into man going back to the moon or woman going back to the moon, that other things are discovered in the pursuit of those missions.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a cliche, but it's true. A friend of mine, an astronomer, always says when people criticize these spacecraft and they say, the Webb, let's say the James Webb Space Telescope, it was, what, $6 billion or so. But it's appropriate to point out that nobody put $6 billion in a suitcase and launched it on the rocket. Right? The $6 billion didn't go into space. It was spent on Earth. And what is often the case, so putting aside the glory and wonder of the discoveries that are made, that basically you are paying people to do high-tech jobs and do research and build machines that operate at the edge of the possible. And history tells us that tends to be extremely useful. You're inventing things and trying to do things that are difficult. And that expertise never stays in one place. It then spreads out across our civilization in ways that you can't really predict or even quantify.
Indeed, and you did sound very excited earlier. I mean, you sound excited the whole time about all of this, which is infectious, even if, people are trying to keep up, including myself. But when you talked about the golden possibility of there being, life out there, and that question of, are we alone? Where are you with that? What do you say to people right now with the latest information?
Well, so this, again, I think there's in cosmology, I say this in the show as well, it's one of the most challenging subjects because at one level it makes us feel very, very small. and insignificant. And it's true, physically. I mean, the Earth is one planet around one star amongst 400 billion stars in one galaxy amongst 2 trillion galaxies in the part of the universe we can see. Right? So we're definitely small, right? So you can't argue that.
Yes, you've clarified that.
But you're right. If you ask the question about life, the answer is we don't know. We've found nothing alive beyond the Earth, but admittedly we haven't been very far or looked tremendously hard, although we are looking hard now on Mars because we suspect there might have been microbes on Mars because there was once water on Mars and it was geologically active, and all the things that we think led to the origin of life on Earth were present on Mars around the same time, about 3.5 to 4 billion years ago. So we wouldn't be surprised if we find that microbes existed, probably subsurface on Mars, or maybe on some of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn where there's water today. However, nobody expects anything more complicated than a microbe. And it's interesting, if you look at the history of life on Earth, you have microbes around 3.8 billion years ago, pretty much, not long after the Earth formed in geological time. But if you look for evidence of complex life on Earth, then really there isn't any in the fossil record until about 600 million years ago or so. So on this planet, for most of the history of the planet, there was slime, basically, single-celled things doing interesting stuff, photosynthesis and things, but nothing more complicated than a single cell. And it's only in the last 500 million years or so that you get this explosion of life on Earth. And only, as I said, it's only in the last less than 1 million years that we've had Homo sapiens on Earth. And in the last few tens of thousands of years, we've had a civilization. So here, it took pretty much 4 billion years to go from cell to civilization. And that's a third of the age of the universe. And so that leads many biologists that I speak to suggest that whilst microbes might be common, civilizations might be rare. Actually, I asked a friend of mine, a great physicist, Sean Carroll, how many civilizations do you think there would be in the Milky Way galaxy, a typical galaxy? How many in a typical galaxy? And he said, none. Right? None. And I think I tend to say 1. So somewhere between 0 and 1 probably. But that's a guess.
But do you want there
it's
to
a
be,
good guess.
Brian? Is that what it is? You sound like perhaps you have an optimism for it, and I wonder what's underpinning that.
I would love there to be, and actually, because it worries me, and this is the way that I end my show, actually, it worries me that let's take that position. Let's imagine that in our galaxy, 400 billion suns, there's just us that thinks, right? I mean, microbes all over the place, but in terms of things that think and can feel, and in a very real sense, bring meaning to the universe. All these things we've talked about, the beauty of these galaxies, they're not beautiful if there's nothing there to perceive them, right? They're just galaxies. So if that's it in this galaxy, then the decisions that we make now as a civilization have a galactic implications, right? If we destroy ourselves, for example, deliberately or through inaction, then it's possible that we eliminate meaning, perhaps forever, in a galaxy of 400 billion stars. And so I think that leads you to, it's a good working assumption that we have a tremendous responsibility, in a sense, not to do that. So I would be much more comfortable with our current predicament if the galaxy was filled with civilizations. Then I'd say, well, okay, it would be rather stupid of us to eliminate all this beautiful culture and science and art and music that we've built up. But at least there's someone else that's doing that. But I'm not actually sure there is.
The top names in climate change are on Bloomberg.
I want everybody committed to the kind of action that we need. We have a global emergency now. You know, we're still putting 162 million tons of man-made global warming pollution into the sky every day, using the sky as an open sewer. That's trapping as much extra heat as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every day. That's what the scientists tell us, and the data shows it. That's crazy. That's why we have a third of Pakistan underwater. That's why we have the historic heat wave in China. Nothing comparable to that ever. That's why the heat records are broken every year. And we're seeing an increase in the flows of climate refugees crossing international borders that are due to vastly expand unless we take action to solve the climate crisis.
Nobody covers climate change like Bloomberg, your global business authority.
How comfortable are you with space tourism and the pursuit of that knowledge and meaning being left largely to a very small group of rich men?
You're right. The idea that the technology is used, if all it was used for was to send a few very, very rich people into space on a joyride, then there would be a real criticism there. But that's not all the technology is used for. So I think it's important to understand that the space industry is about operating initially in near-Earth orbits, and we've already industrialized that. You know, we all use it every day. I mean, we all switch on our sat-nav in the car. Satellite navigation. Yes. Right? It requires infrastructure in orbit. A lot of the stuff we know about climate change, resource use and so on, that's coming from satellites. So I think you have to look at the space industry as a whole, really, and say, well, it's not just about... The same argument was made for intercontinental travel by aircraft. It's true, when the first aircraft were built, it was extremely expensive and the preserve of the rich. But of course, within a few decades, it had democratized travel. And, you know, we all take advantage of that every day. So I think that's the right way to look at space. It's not to focus on particular bits of it that we might not like for moral reasons or whatever it is. So it's actually, I really do advocate for the fact of looking at the whole industry, which is tremendously important now.
It is. I mean, I am interested, though, that you did say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that all political leaders should go to space, perhaps for some perspective. Do you still, do you still think that?
Most of them should come back as well. Most of them.
Very good, very good. That's the last part of that quote.
It was based on an idea which is a very famous idea called the overview effect, which is well known that astronauts change their view of always, as far as I'm aware anyway, when they come back, they have a more positive view of the value of this planet and are very much more focused on preserving it as a beautiful place, perhaps a unique place in a galaxy, as I said. So I felt that, and I do feel that having had the good fortune of speaking to many astronauts, that experience if the people who make the decisions, the big decisions about our future, could have that experience, I think would be a good investment. It's an extremely hard argument to make, you know, that we should actually spend money allowing, you know, in our case at the moment, it's our Prime Minister, right? So in the UK, you'd say, well, we should spend money sending Boris Johnson into space and bringing him back safely to Earth again, because it would change his view. Now, I don't think I'd win that argument. But I think there's a serious point there, which is that it does seem to change people for the better when they see our Earth as it really is, which is a fragile thing against the blackness of space. So I think it's an argument that I would try to make. I would lose it because it's very expensive.
Do you want to go? Are you willing to go?
I would love to, because as I said, I'd love to share that experience of seeing our world from space. I think it's really, unarguably, it appears to be a life-changing experience, and it seems to change individuals for the better.
You wouldn't be scared?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I remember one of my great heroes, John Young, who flew on the Apollo missions, walked on the moon, test flew the first space shuttle. And he said that anyone who sits on top of however many thousands of tons of liquid hydrogen, helium, liquid hydrogen and oxygen, and isn't a bit worried, doesn't understand the problem. So he's probably right.
Do you have people come and talk to you about faith? Do they talk to you about how religion and that side of life fits into your level of knowledge? Because I know you've travelled around the world talking to people.
Yeah, a lot. It comes up as a question because cosmology it's a science of origins. And actually with the study of black holes I mentioned, we're even beginning now to think about what space and time are. So naturally, I say it in the show actually, I say when we're talking about this, it's the moment of creation, if that was. So we're asking, was there a moment of creation? And that's the correct language to use, I think. Yes. Or it's evocative language, but it's really what we're talking about. Did everything come into being, or has it always been here? We actually don't even know the answer to that question, really. So yeah, I get asked it a lot because I think cosmology is a challenging science that challenges us to think about these things that we often, we associate that with theology or philosophy. And I think that's a good thing because something I very strongly believe in is that segmenting or making little canisters and putting different bits of human experience or different, music and art and theology and philosophy and science and segmenting them all is just the wrong way to look at it. What we're doing is a deep level trying to understand what it means to be human in this tremendous, potentially infinite universe. And so I those questions get asked, and ultimately I say, I'm quite straightforward. I say, I'm not a religious person myself, but the correct thing to say, even about the question, did the universe have a beginning in time, is we don't know. We don't know. And that's it.
Professor Brian Cox, thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to you for being with us. Until next time, goodbye.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now. Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now. Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Why does everybody want to be a consultant, and what are all these consultants doing?
Well, David, I think that we actually defy the label consultant because sometimes consultant seems to imply that we only give advice. And When you look at what Accenture does, we're really different than the traditional version of a consultant. We're really about relevance and results, and that's what is driving our business.
What about a consulting project? In my example, I'm the CEO, I have a problem, I call you up, I say, solve my problem or give me a solution.
We don't operate as big companies permanently in crisis mode. And so when you think about like how long does it solve things, a lot of it starts with, the company being willing to set aggressive goals. And so what we are trying to do now is work with our clients to work differently and to work faster.
The climate crisis is often spoken about in terms of facts and figures. Emissions to be cut and rising temperatures to be avoided. But what about the people who are trying to ensure we hit these numbers? How do they think? What drives them? And who inspires them? On this new series of Leaders with LACWA Goes Green, I'll be speaking to key decision makers across a range of industries to learn how they're navigating the most pressing issue of our time. I begin with the man who's driving clean energy policy in the White House as part of a special conversation at the Bloomberg Green Summit in New York. This event attracts leaders from all walks of life, meeting at the crossroads of sustainability, science, and culture. So it's the perfect place to kickstart this new series, especially when it involves a holder of one of the top climate jobs in the US. I've come to meet political veteran John Podesta. His CV reads like a who's who in Washington. He served as chief of staff to former President Bill Clinton and as a climate advisor to Barack Obama. Now he's back serving the Biden administration, tasked with overseeing the largest climate investment in the country's history, the Inflation Reduction Act. It involves tax credits and incentives for carbon-free development to the tune of a massive $374 billion. It is not without controversy. Critics, including some of America's closest allies, say it gives unfair advantage to U.S. companies. Podesta can see the challenges, but overall, he's optimistic about the transition to a greener world. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
You only have a small job of implementing the Inflation Reduction Act and all the money that goes with into the projects. Do you have the hardest job in Washington, the second hardest, or the third hardest?
Well, definitely the president has the hardest job. I think the chief of staff has the second hardest. I know that from experience. And then, but this is a lot of blocking and tackling. I thought it'd be easy to give away $370 billion odd dollars, but it turns out there's a lot to it. To try to get it right, to make sure that it's going to the right purposes, to do both the transition from fossil fuel-based energy to clean energy, but do it in a way that is going to pay dividends to the people who have often been suffered the most from pollution, from environmental degradation, et cetera. So we're trying to do all that at once. It's a huge project. And it will transform our economy, but it's really exciting to do.
So, John, you're one of the most well-respected people in Washington. You've been around the block. You're like a veteran. You were actually going to retire. So what brought you back to the White House?
I like to joke that I failed at retirement. I worked very hard on the outside. I was chairing a think tank that I founded called the Center for American Progress, but worked very hard to see first and was, very happy that the president took this on during the course of the 2020 campaign, and then make good on it in the early days of the administration. We pushed for the legislation to pass. It was a little bit perils of Pauline. It died 4 or 5 times, but it came back to life. And so when it did pass, and the president asked me to come back to the White House and try to help implement it, I had a lot of experience in government, so. He had confidence that I would add value in that enterprise. I thought it was, if you can help out, you should do it, particularly against a crisis that I've been working on really for the better part of a generation. I started with President Clinton in the White House, really focused towards the end of the administration on security and both the human security and the national security consequences. And then I've kind of made a career out of being a climate advocate.
Sometimes I imagine every day you have a difficult conversation with someone. Who do you think about to keep going on climate change? Do you think about your kids? Is it someone that inspired in your youth? Like, how do you just think this is the right thing to do and we won't stop?
You know, I think about all the people who really need to lead better lives. My kids are grown, you know. My grandkids are kind of tackling this as college students. But there's a future out there for a lot of young people. I had the honor of serving on the Secretary General's high-level panel that wrote the first draft of the Sustainable Development Goals. Traveled all around the world and talked to young people, and that's both inspiring and it gives you a sense of responsibility about what are their lives going to look like, what are the jobs of the future going to be like, how are they going to have livelihoods that make sense, not just in the United States, which I'm first and foremost concerned about, but globally and particularly in developing economies. So every day I think, well, you do what you can. You can't. This is not the kind of a problem that you turn a switch on, you solve overnight. But you make progress. You go forward. You try to always, as I said, do what you can.
So what's changed actually in the last 2 to 3 years? It feels like there's a lot more focus on climate change and sustainability.
Yeah. I think we stopped asking the question, what do we shut down? And we started asking the question, what do we need to build? And that was, I think, a happier story, one that the American public could get behind. And I think you also are taking advantage of the deep cost reductions. You know, solar power is now the cheapest power to deploy in the United States, and that's why you see it growing exponentially, both domestically but also globally. 75% of the new power generation is going to come from solar over the next 5 years. So we're taking advantage of trends that are already there, but the climate crisis requires us to accelerate that. And I think that's what's exciting about this moment. I think that, I worked for President Obama as well on climate change. And at that point, we were trying to reduce emissions by the middle of the century by 80%. That's where the world was. You know, we had to, the problems were severe. Severe weather was both adding to, again, the tremendous cost burden on economies, but it was also upending human security around the globe. And so 80% seemed like a good deal. And then in 2018, the IPCC did what was called the 1.5 report. What was the difference between what a 2-degree world looked like and what a 1.5-degree world? And the catastrophe to the planet between those two poles led everybody to conclude that actually the job is bigger. We have to go to net zero. And that's a transformation of the global economy on the size and scale that's never occurred in human history. So that's a kind of daunting task, but it's full, I think, also of challenge, opportunity, the chance for innovation, and the chance to have the private sector play a fundamental role in making that change happen.
I think most citizens understand the benefits and getting to the goals, but the divisions politically get wider and wider. Why?
Well, I think if you look at where the American public is, there's relatively broad support for clean energy across the political spectrum. It's stronger amongst Democrats than it is amongst Republicans, and independents are, as usual, kind of like in the middle. But that's not reflected in our political arena. And I think one of the things that's occurred, some of that is vested interests that invest in politics to produce that result. Some of it's disinformation. that is rampant.
So how do you match, the clean energy future with more drilling? And I know allies across the world are always saying, well, U.S., because of the size and scope, should be doing so much more.
Look, we're still, the world still is powered, particularly in transportation, on oil and fossil fuels. The result of the Russian brutal invasion of Ukraine and the use of fossil fuels as a weapon against Europe and the resistance to that invasion has meant that Europe needed new supplies of natural gas. So those are issues that are real, and the market has adjusted to that, partly through policy, but partly through a swing to try to supply Europe. The United States has now become the largest supplier to Europe of natural gas. But over time, we have to change that, quite frankly.
Coming up, Podesta argues why the energy transition will usher in changes even more profound than the rise of the internet. White House climate advisor John Podesta is a political operative who's seen it all, working with multiple presidents over the past several decades. And yet he thinks the climate crisis will bring in changes unlike anything seen in human history. So John, 5 years from now, how will you look back at 2023? Is it the start of something or an actual turning point?
Yeah, I really feel like it is a turning point of it, and it is a transformation that was, I lived through the in the earlier part of my career, seeing the power of what the internet did and what communications and information technologies did to our economy. I think this is even more profound than that, and it's at a global scale. To transform an energy system that is huge, incumbent, and it's got to happen fast if we're going to have a planet that's livable.